Hello, and welcome to the 8th Globe and Mail Craft Club. Apologies for the late start. We had wild technical difficulties, as we sometimes do. At one point, I was in a screen on a forest. That was a new one for us. So as always, we appreciate your patience and understanding. And that's the reality of hosting a craft show from our dining rooms and living rooms. And yeah, it's part of the fun. So for those of you who may be new to the Craft Club, I'm Jana Pruden. I'm a reporter at the Globe and Mail. I normally write about court and long features, sometimes crime, terrible things. And because these are strange times, I am currently hosting a pandemic pop-up craft club where every 2 weeks we get together and make something creative, something fun that we learn from artists all over the country. A reminder that all of our classes, past and future, are available on our website, tgam.ca/craftclub. And I'd really like to encourage you to sign up for our Globe and Mail Parenting and Relationships newsletter. We promote the classes that are coming, and it's a really handy way to find out what's going on with the Craft Club. I always also encourage you, subscribe to the Globe and Mail. This is free for everybody, of course, but you know, the Globe and Mail does pay me to do this. So if you are interested in news and or crafts, please subscribe. And please also come and see us on the Globe Craft Club Facebook group. This Facebook group is a really beautiful, happy place. We don't want to ruin it, but it might be the happy place on the internet. Everyone is so supportive, so nice. Everyone's doing really beautiful work and sharing their work. And I encourage you to get in there, show us your painting from tonight, show us other things that you're doing. Amy Ames is making a quilting block. So if you're a quilter, she's going to put together some pieces for a children's hospice, which is a really amazing project. And so you can connect with her there. A reminder also to jump in and ask questions in the Facebook chat, and I will put it to our guests today. This is our 8th of 10 planned Craft Club classes. Thank you to everyone who has emailed my bosses to ask that we keep this going. It's very kind, and I always love being here with you, and we have such a wonderful time. It's been a real ray of sunshine in sometimes what can be some pretty bleak weeks. Coming up on May 11th, miniatures with Tom Brown, a Calgary artist, which I'm so excited for that class. And we're working on a surprise for the class after that. So fingers crossed, I'll be telling you about that shortly. So with that preamble, I am so incredibly happy to be here today with Ashley Gayle and Vanessa Ansah from artistsonline.ca. As soon as I started, there was like a huge outpouring of people that wanted to do watercolor, and it did not take me long to find these ladies, and I'm going to welcome them now. Hello.
Hi, how you doing? Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're really excited for this evening and just to be a part of this kind of coming together.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And I'm not sure that we've had a class that has been as anticipated as watercolor. And one thing that I find so interesting about you two, you started a business at the beginning of the pandemic.
We did, yeah. You know, the pandemic sort of was what really brought us together and brought the idea, sort of just helping people be able to connect through art. We know, you know, for myself, I live by myself. And so it is really hard to stay connected when you're not able to, you know, sort of go to other people's houses, have other people in. So it's a great way if you live long distance from family, friends, whatever, you can connect, you know, all across North America. So it's good. It's good so far.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey for both of us. Being so passionate about art, for me, this is, you know, a dream, being able to bring that interest to others and see how happy and fulfilling it can be. You know, introducing new people to art, but also bringing people who maybe had previous interests back to art. And I've been seeing that a lot with the pandemic and everything going on, that people are really finding their artistic sides again. So we hope that everyone brings, at least the openness to get creative and just be flexible and open with the fact that, we're all here just to have fun and just create something that we can be proud of that we did together.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be totally explicitly clear, they teach lots of amazing art classes. So if you get tonight and you're interested in doing more, definitely check them out, artistsonline.ca. And I've heard that the classes are super fun. And, for kids, for adults, they're open to, you said everybody,
everybody. Yeah, we sort of cover the spectrum. We do private events, birthday parties, corporate events, and then we also host our own online classes. Usually try and stick to about once a month, but we do have a different feature image. But if you do have an idea of an image that you want, an event that you're hosting, we definitely can accommodate that as well.
And we have an event coming up on June 24th, so you can visit our website and sign up for that class. We're going to be painting a flamingo piece, which we're really excited about. There is a speed lapse of me painting that on our website as well.
Yeah, it's definitely one of our popular images, so we're going to bring that one back.
Okay, I love that. Well, I know that everybody is probably like dying to get started.
I know.
Let's do it.
So I have my supplies here. I have to say, so people love watercolor, everyone's interested, but I feel like there's this watercolor intimidation too. And I have that I am a little scared of it, that it can go terribly awry.
So
and I'm going to confess to all of you, they very kindly offered that they would show me how to do it ahead of time. So it would be amazing when I did it here. But I think this kind of goes to your point, Ashley, that, it's not always about being perfect. And so if I'm going to make a big blobby mess, it's going to happen with everyone. Although I did make 2 of my stencils just in case.
Yes. So we did that too, because even we make mistakes. I've done it so many times.
And really in art, honestly, there's no mistakes. Play with it. If it does sort of bleed, you can play with that, make it part of your image. There really isn't mistakes in art. It's just, it goes differently than what you expected. That's the best way to put it.
So I'll introduce the class painting. I'm just going to pull it into my frame a bit, just to kind of show people the finished piece. It was really just inspired by nature and the coming of spring and pretty things and just wanting to have a little bit of brightness in our lives. So really simple floral motif. We really hope that this will be easy for everyone to follow along and simple enough, but also just kind of looks really nice. And you can also play around with colors as well if you want to change up the flower petals. So you're going to follow the same instructions, just with a different color of your choosing.
And we'll show you a bit of how to maybe blend a few different colors. If you want to get in, move sort of away from the burnt oranges and the pinks, go into purples, blues, whatever your idea is. Definitely play with color. Don't feel like you have to follow the picture verbatim, because you really don't.
Okay.
So just going over the materials that we're going to need today. So we have recommended watercolor paper. So I actually just cut this to an 8x11 size and printed the outline right on this watercolor paper. But you can use any thicker paper. Cardstock works fine. Any print paper works well. So we have our outline. You can also, if you've used a transfer method or just sketched it, that's fine as well too. Yeah. So we're also going to be using today liquid watercolors, which are just these regular watercolors that come in a tube. However, I have a palette here just to show an example of a dry palette that you could also use to paint the same way that we're doing. So really the only difference is you're going to want to wet your colors that you're using first, and then just pull from those colors and add them to your palette.
Okay, so that's what I'm using. This was recommended to me as a set that is inexpensive for a beginner, and I suspect many people joining us might be using sort of studio
Yeah.
palettes. Maybe they've raided their children's art supply closet.
Exactly.
For sure.
And you know what? There's like each watercolor and different type of watercolor is going to give you a little bit of a different effect, and that's kind of the beauty of it. So, you know, just playing around, but it doesn't matter if you have a pan color or you have a liquid color, you're going to be able to complete this piece.
Yeah, same effect. So we'll go into brushes. So generally we're using 3 brushes. We're gonna go with a number 2 round brush. This is a smaller tip brush. It's gonna be able to give you more detail at the top. And then you can sort of use the press and pull method with it as well. You'll notice in your painting, you're gonna be painting flowers, little more minute details. These brushes are gonna work really well for that. And then we have a 6 brush. That one's going to be a little bit larger, a little bit wider. Going to use that for the petals, just fills up a bigger image area. And then we have the 12 as well. Less commonly used, but if you want to, you know, just wash over your space quickly, you can definitely use that.
If anyone wanted to add any color or wash to the background of their painting, this would be like a good size brush to use, and you can just pull the color across. That one's a 12.
Right, because you do often see that in the background of a watercolor, that there's you know, sort of this natural washy look in the background.
Right, yeah. So another important material we're going to need is the paper towel. So this has dual purposes. This is great for drying off your brush after cleaning, but it also is must have for fixing any mistakes for spills, or if there's an air spot. It's really easy to lift up areas with watercolor with a paper towel. And oftentimes if you're able to get to it quick enough, it will take it right out. So you can even add a little bit of water if you're trying to pull a color up. You'll find that works a lot better with lighter colors than with darker colors, which tend to stain the paper right away.
You're going to need a couple of water dishes, glasses, whatever you want to use. Generally, you can want to go with a ceramic or a glass. It's not going to absorb. It's not porous. One is going to be for dilution. So you're going to use it when you're pulling your paint to dilute your paint, lighten the color so you can wash with it. The other is simply just to rinse your brushes.
Okay.
So you want to keep them separate. Your clean water, you want to make sure that you have that so that as you're adding it to colors, the colors don't get too muddy, which will happen as your water gets dirty if you use that same water. It's not necessary, and honestly, a lot of times when I'm painting, I get really messy and I don't bother with the 2, or I have 2 and they're both just dirty, and you know, it's really just get in the flow, and you know, it's not something that you have to do. I think it's just a tip if you're trying to avoid those things.
Okay.
You'll also need a palette. So this is my go-to palette that I love. I got it at the dollar store. It's just a ceramic dish, but ceramic is really nice for watercolor because you'll see how the color kind of sticks to the palette, whereas some materials you'll see that it'll start to bead up. And so this kind of is a really nice surface for mixing watercolors, but not necessary. I have another example here, just a plastic palette, which you can get pretty much anywhere, dollar store or any craft store.
Yeah.
So I just brought a plate. Is a plate
Plate is
over?
perfect.
Definitely.
Okay.
Similar to like a ceramic, so that'll work well. You can use it to pull and blend your color. You can use it if you just want to place your color right on the plate. If you don't have a palette, that'll work too.
A plate is actually really nice because it has that big round surface, and then as you're mixing colors, you can just keep with that same palette. A smaller palette can get a little hard because with watercolor, you're kind of using a bigger area when you're mixing.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's basically the materials. We also had said on the list of materials that you would need masking tape. So that is just for the purpose of securing your painting to the table or painting surface if that's what you're more comfortable with. It'll just keep your paper sturdy. I sometimes kind of like to move mine around and angle it, so I'm not going to tape mine. If you're doing a wet on wet technique, which we're not today, you would want to tape your sheet down absolutely to prevent it from buckling, which is just when the paper starts to dry uneven and you get like wrinkles in your paper.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, so that's everything. We're gonna get started. I'm going to just start with showing how we're going to be mixing our first colors. So I'm going to go quickly over the colors we're going to be using. So we're just using a standard primary red. So I have a cadmium hue here. We're going to be using also a yellow tone. You're going to want a blue as well. If you have a burnt umber, you could use black, but I would suggest burnt umber, which will not darken your colors as much. This will be used for some of the shading.
So just say that someone watching this did not know what burnt umber was.
It's
I know they
brown.
do art school and they don't really remember.
Right.
What's just a nice brown will work.
It's brown.
Well.
It's like a dark brown. So I can even show you when I open the palette here, or sorry, open the tube. It's just a dark brown color.
Right. So for those of us who are using dry paints, what should I be wetting them, you said, or?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example with my palette here. I have this little dropper thing, but you could just use even your brush. And you're just gonna kind of give each of your pans a little bit of water, which is gonna start helping the paint kind of soften up a bit.
Okay,
that'll just help the color lift up better.
So with my my big brush, I can just dip it in this shot glass from a bar called Harvey's, and just so that's the burnt umber, you said, and so I'm just wetting it.
Yeah, so you're just adding like a substantial amount of water, and you can just let it kind of sit on top. And sit there as we start with some of the other colors, then the water will saturate into those colors as well.
I started with the darkest. Now that I know what burnt umber is, I just like dove right into it. But is it better to start with the light colors, like start with yellow first and then work your way darker, or does it matter?
It doesn't really matter, just because what's going to happen is as we pull those colors, we're going to add them to our palette. So they're not going to stay on that palette that you're working with.
Okay, so I'm doing brown, red, yellow, what else?
And blue, and then a white.
Red, okay. And just really getting them wet.
And the white, I just want to say, is not necessary. It does help when we're lightening up a color, but the other way to lighten a color is just add more water. So if you don't have white watercolor on hand because it isn't as common, that's okay as well.
Yeah, we're generally just using the white more for tinting purposes. It's not really a main shade in any of the images.
Right.
So I'm just going to prep my palette here, and I'm just adding all of the colors. So you only need a really little amount if you're using liquid watercolor. They go a long way. Even this that I have is, it's a lot, so. Just kind of little amounts. I spread them out so that as I'm pulling from different colors, they don't mix with each other.
While you're doing that, maybe I'll just give some shout outs to people who are here with us tonight. Jody Salmons, one of our regulars. Hi, Jody.
Hi. Hi, Jody.
Christine saying hi from Vancouver.
Hi, Christine. How you doing?
Hi.
Suzanne from Moncton. We have Gabriella from California.
Oh, from Moncton.
Hello, Gabriella.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for coming.
We have Mary Chong, Kelly Glasner. Lisa Clarkson says she subscribed to the Globe this week because of Craft Club. So thank you, Lisa. That's awesome. And Kelly saying, this is the happy place on the internet, and it is, right? I feel quite relaxed and ready to go on this. Okay,
Thanks for inviting us to the happy place.
Don't tell any of the bad people.
I would never.
No trolls.
So we'll get started with kind of the first area of our painting here. So we're going to actually be focusing on this flower here, which is the flower to the left of the painting.
Okay.
And for that color, we're going to be making a nice kind of blush pink tone. So we're going to take a good amount of white, and I should have wet my brush first, so I'm going to do that. So you want to get a good amount of white there, but not too much. And if you're not using white, you're going to take some of the red and really just dilute it down with your water. So
Okay. So mine are drying up like as fast as I did it. Question.
Yes.
Just for convenience sake, can I just be mixing this on the plastic lid of my, like, is that enough room if I
Absolutely. So that would be a paint bowl. So if you want to mix that with some water and pull it over to the lid, a plate, anything that you have as
Okay, so I'll do that.
That's honestly perfect.
yeah, any surface.
Okay, so I'm mixing the red.
So that's kind of the color pink that you're going to have. And I would suggest that everyone keep a spare piece of paper on hand, just so that you can test out your colors.
I can confirm both of my waters are already, one's muddy and one's like pink. So I've already sullied both waters.
It'll work.
So I've added enough water to mine. As you can see, it's this nice light pink here.
On this side here, it's pretty similar. Mine's got a little more orange.
So we're going to start with that because with watercolor, you really want to focus on the lighter areas first and then build up to your darker areas. Like I said, white isn't always necessary. So a lot of times you'll leave those highlighted areas and won't paint them at all. So that when you're done your painting, those are the white spots. So you're kind of working in reverse, which is why watercolor can be a little more challenging.
Right.
So we're going to fill in the inside petals on this flower. So
okay, so we've made the pink. I was using the big brush. This is a question from my Auntie Maureen. Hi, Auntie. What brush I'm using. So I was using the big one just to put the most amount of water. What brush are you now using for the petals? Is that the little guy?
So for the petals, I'm just using one of the smaller brushes. So you could use your 2 or your 4 or a 6 even is fine.
Okay.
You could even use up to an 8, I would say, for the petals. And then you're just going to be, you don't want to get too much water, but you want to get enough. And you want your pink to be nice and light. So you want to test it first. And then once you get that desired color, you're just going to pull the color throughout the petal. And if you see that you have a lot of water and it's kind of pooling and making a puddle in a certain area, you can go back after, just kind of dry your brush off and then come back with your brush and pull some of that color back out.
Okay.
That'll help you get a nice even flat area, which is what the technique with the wet on dry that we're working with today. So we're kind of layering it up bit by bit.
Okay. So it's this little, is it that petal? Because I have a little bit of trouble seeing. Does it matter which petal I'm starting at, I guess, is the question.
No, so I can try and get a better zoom.
It's going to be sort of in the central petal that's the tallest.
Okay.
The one that we're focusing on first, yeah.
Okay.
So I'll kind of lift my painting up so you can take a look. So we're going to be painting this petal, this one here, and this one. And you're going to want to try and not have the 2 petals, the painting touch. So leave a tiny little bit of space along the edge. We'll go back and fill those in once those are dry. That will just avoid them bleeding together.
Okay. And should I wet the brush again? I noticed my paint is still there, so just wet the brush?
Yeah, so just keep your brush nice and wet throughout the process.
Okay.
So if you're noticing that it's harder to pull the paint out across because you don't have as much paint left, you can just dip your brush in the water and then just kind of reapply some of the paint. Okay. The thing about that is it's nice. It sometimes creates differences in the tones that you're laying down. So it can be nice, surprising texture that you create in your painting that way.
Right. Okay. So while I'm doing this, we have a question from someone asking if you can explain how watercolor paper differs from regular paper.
Sure. So the main difference with watercolor paper is it's coarse and it has more hold to it. So it's a lot thicker, it's a lot more sturdy. There's different ratings that you can get for watercolor paper that would have a different level of coarseness. You can get hot pressed or cold pressed, which generally hot pressed is a smooth surface, and then cold pressed has that granular type feel. It just gives a really nice effect with the watercolor. If you were to use just kind of a regular piece of printer paper, and I'll give you an example because I have one here. As we're kind of laying on the colors in a petal here, the colors go on, but they're not kind of absorbing into the paper the same way. You're going to get some more of that blotchiness, and you're going to also see the paper starting to buckle already in that little area. It's just not thick enough to hold the water.
Right. Okay, here's a good question from Susan. She says, hello. Hi, Susan. And she says, do I erase the pencil marks? I've drawn the picture onto the paper already. And this is relevant to me as well because I have...
That's a good question.
Yeah, so you can definitely erase them. What I usually do, because if I erase them completely, then it's harder for me to see. I have a kneaded eraser that is just kind of like a piece of gum, and I just dab it onto my drawing, and that lifts up enough of the lead that it lightens your outline. Another tip is to do your sketching or outlines in a different color erasable pencil crayon. So I have a red sketching pencil that I typically use for my under drawings, and it doesn't show through the watercolor as much. And when it does, I kind of like it because it has a, that effect of seeing the outline. You can also just use a regular eraser and just kind of lightly erase that area.
Yeah, gum eraser would probably work best, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool idea. Great question, Susan.
So for this. Yeah, so for this petal here, this one is another one that would be a little bit lighter, but we're also going to kind of dry the brush off and then pull the color along the top out to kind of create a highlight on the edge of this petal there. So I just kind of lifted up some of the paint.
Right. Okay. So, and I think you've maybe done one more petal than me. So if people at home can see, yeah, you've done, I guess this is why paint by number exists. It would be quite convenient.
Yeah.
Number to it. So I'm going to do this other third piece. And then you said that, so you're sort of starting and trying to pull it up so that we see that different variation in the color.
Yeah, you're going to pull it down so that the pooling's sort of building closer to the bottom, and that's going to create a shade. And the top, it's more of a gradient. So it's going to be darker at the bottom, lighter at the top, like ombre.
Right. I feel like people who are good at makeup would be good at watercolor and vice versa.
Yeah, I started off in makeup. So
did you?
That's sort of where my background is. And then she's really more of the art. And so together, we kind of work it out.
Yeah. So I'm just painting this last kind of lighter colored petal, which is the one right here.
Okay. Okay, I see. Maybe my tracing was not great on that petal, but now I understand.
So again, it doesn't have to be perfect, and if you're using the printed outline, it won't show through, so it's really forgiving. Like, you can go outside of the lines, it's not a big deal. Flowers, really, each one is different, so it doesn't need to look exactly like mine, and it's great practice, I think, doing florals. So we're going to actually use the same pink, but we're going to add back some red to it, and we're going to darken it up a little bit. And we're going to use that darker shade to do some of the other petals on that same flower. So I'm just taking a little bit of my red here and adding it to the pink that I made. I'm gonna need a bit more water too,
So I'm way behind. So
we can wait. We'll wait until you catch up a little bit. So let us know when you're done with those light petals.
okay, so I was working on this, trying to make that one petal darker at the bottom, and I'm not sure how successful I am at that. If I want.
And for these petals, actually, it's okay if it doesn't look darker at the bottom, because we're going to go back over all of the petals after with a slightly darker shade and just do that kind of shaded area.
Okay, good to know. So which petal have you moved on to now?
So these are the 5 that we painted with the lighter shade.
Okay.
And I've now added a little bit more of this red to the original pink that we were just using to make it a little bit more dark and vibrant again.
Okay.
And then we're going to use that to do some of the darker areas on the flower petals.
Okay.
So the outer edges of the flower. So up here, you're going to see the outer edge of this first petal that we did.
Right. And that's the one that's kind of like high and swoopy that's going up?
Yeah.
And you're putting that inside the part that we didn't paint earlier?
Exactly. Yeah. On the outside edge there. And then we're going to be using the same pink for this area.
Okay.
And also along this outside edge here, this bottom petal here, and this petal on this side here as well.
Okay. It's funny because when I think of watercolor, and I always think about people, you know, by the side of a lake or in a park or something. And then when I saw the pictures that were taken of you two, there you were in a park. So it must be something about watercolor that kind of has this, I guess, organicness, or has this organic appeal to it.
It really does. It's more, I don't know if it's because of the mix of the water. It's more earthy to me than maybe like an oil paint.
Mm-hmm. Or an acrylic.
Yeah.
It's also really easy to travel with, and I think that's probably why people will take watercolor paints outside. This is actually a travel set. So this is the Windsor and Newton just kind of student grade travel set. It's really great. There's a little add-on that you can put water in. It comes with this little brush. It has a mixing palette. So really that's all you need, maybe a little bottle of water and, you know, a small sketchbook, and you could go out and do some plein air sketching or just painting of nature.
Yeah, that's great. I've actually seen, when I was buying this paper, I noticed that she had some sketchbooks that all had watercolor paper inside of them, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I seem to have made a red that's a little bit blood colored.
So if you add a little bit too much red, and red can be a really dominating color when you're mixing, so I always start with like a tiny little bit and then move up from there. But if you add too much, you just add more white to your red or more water.
Yeah, just dilute it a bit.
Right. And you're doing the side one and the under one. Okay. It is weird because my memory of watercolor is that it's stressful, but I'm finding it quite relaxing. Maybe my stress has changed.
It doesn't have to be stressful. I think, you know, I used to always be really scared of watercolor. I have professionally used gouache. That's probably my #1 medium, which is a water-based paint, but it's opaque. And I just feel like it's a safety net because, you know, it's opaque. If I make a mistake, I can paint over it. But with watercolor, it's so much more, you feel like you have to get it right the first time. But, you know, it's something that I'm still fairly new to. And I just love it. I love practicing. And, you know, it's okay if it's not perfect or what you expected it was going to be. I think each time I paint with watercolor, I'm a little happier with what I create. So.
Isn't that the thing? Like, to me, I feel like with art, it never turns out exactly the way that you imagined it was going to be, but it's always beautiful.
Yeah. Right.
I love the design that you made. I think it's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Do you think that there's this idea of, who can make art and who can be an artist, say with, like a capital A artist? Do you find in your classes that some people just think that they can't do it, or that they shouldn't do it, or it's not going to be good enough, so they don't do it?
Absolutely. I think we get a lot of anxiety about the skill level with painting in particular. And I think it's the same with drawing. You'd find in a drawing class, I taught fine art classes at Michael's for years, and it was the same thing. But I think once people start doing it and they get into the class and they start just really having a good time, I don't think any of that matters anymore. And they realize also that most of the people in the class are in the same boat. So it becomes, also sometimes just comedic things that happen, your paintbrush falls or flips and lands on your painting in a funny way, and it just becomes like, a moment to laugh about, not to stress about.
Mm-hmm.
So for this petal here, I've just continued using some of that darker color, and then I'm actually just diluting the top part of the petal by adding some more water and then pulling in that color. So it's going to give it a bit of a more blended effect by doing that. So I basically painted all here, the dark, and then just used water to pull the rest of the color through.
Right. So I already filled that one in distractedly, but so could I? I was just like taking and coloring it in. Could I put white there and like put a little bit of a highlight? Or
yeah,
is it...
absolutely.
Okay, I'm gonna try that.
There's like some little white areas in between all of my petals, which is where I didn't want the bleeding to happen. We're gonna go back in after and just fill those in.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm gonna give that a shot.
So next we're gonna add a little bit of depth to our flower. So right now it's a little bit flat because we've just done kind of that base layer. So we're going to take the same red that we were just using, the darker one. We are going to go back and add a bit more white to lighten it up, but we don't want to lighten it up as much as it was initially. So we want a bit of a more vibrant pink. So that one's still a little too light, so I'm going to actually put a little bit more red in there.
Question from Wendy Edmonds. Can you explain the strokes you're using? Yeah, I should have asked that too. I'm just kind of randomly doing it. But
yeah. So there's no technical term for them, and if there is, I don't know what it is. But I'm just I really just paint in a way that's comfortable for my hand and comfortable for me. I could tell you like a certain way to hold a brush, and I've watched all kinds of tutorial videos on watercolor myself trying to figure out like how can I do this technique or that technique. At the end of the day, I've had to figure out what feels comfortable to my hand, because if you're not comfortable when you're painting, it's going to be really awkward and you're not going to probably get the results you want. So just finding ways that you can place your hand or hold your brush. As far as strokes go, I'm really, to fill in the petals, I'm using the tip of my brush to kind of outline the shape, and then just really doing kind of a full fill. This is with a smaller brush. If I had a larger brush, it would cover more of that area at one time.
Okay. Now, can you explain the dark thing we are doing now for people like myself that...
Yes. So we're just going back to this blush pink, and we're adding a bit more red.
Okay.
So that it's the same kind of light pink, but that it's a bit darker. And we're going to now be adding some shadow areas into our flower. So the first shadow area is down on this bottom left petal.
Okay.
And we're going to be kind of adding in just some 3D effect in the petal here, and some shadow down along the edge. We're also going to pull it along the inner edge of this petal here and along the bottom. And so that the line isn't too harsh, you can also get some clean water on your brush and just pull some of that color up and kind of blend it into the rest of the petal. So you'll see that I've just kind of pulled it with some of that water.
Yeah, just make sure not to use too much water. Definitely use your paper towel to blot some of the water off so you don't get like crazy pooling.
And so the idea
Just go to your
is,
brush and pull it.
Yeah.
Either way.
right. And the idea is that that darkness is kind of where a shadow would be.
Yes.
A natural shadow, yeah.
Yeah, because you want to give your flower some depth so that it looks like, you know, real petals. Obviously, it depends on the look you're going for as well, because I do love, you know, graphic style, and I've done that with watercolor as well. So doing a line drawing in ink and then filling that in more as a coloring agent as opposed to, you know, the main star medium. But yeah, so there's different ways of using it, and I think that, again, it comes down to personal preference. With art, people can't really say what's the right way to use watercolor.
Right. Okay. So that's the one petal that's sort of the farthest one on the right side. We're doing that with, building in a little bit of shadow.
Yep, this small one down here. I've done this one on the right top.
Okay.
And I'm also doing that kind of wispy, tall petal as well along this inner edge.
Okay.
And along the bottom again.
And some of that looks like it will cover that pencil, those pencil lines a bit too. That will help with that maybe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Although I feel like the pencil lines are kind of the least of my worries at this point. I'm not too. We have a request. If you could just show the finished painting again for a minute so people can see that.
So right now we're adding in these shaded areas here, along this bottom edge we're going to do, and these kind of shaded areas here.
Yeah, and we'll definitely post a copy of this finished picture as well on the Facebook page and on the Globe site if people want to refer to it later. Yeah, beautiful. I'm going to call that one aspirational at the moment.
Yeah. So we're going to leave this flower once we've done the shading. So we're going to leave this and we're coming back to it. We want it to dry a bit and set. So we're going to move on to this flower that's on the farthest right side. Okay. And it's kind of hidden behind this front flower here. So we're going to work on this one. We are working with the same type of tones, but we're going to be working with more of a corally color this time. So it starts the same way with some red.
Okay. So should I be mixing this up in a new spot? Because that was
so we're starting in a new color now. You're going to be mixing red with a little bit of the yellow. And you want it to have a little bit more red than yellow so that it's not too orange. You still want it to have more of a red color to it. And then to lighten that up, you're just going to add a touch of your white. And not a whole lot of white with this one.
Okay, so a little bit of white and then yellow.
So this is what it would look like, kind of undiluted. And then as I wash it out by adding water to the same color, it's going to get a bit lighter. So that's the light color we want to use to start with.
So it's sort of an an orangey.
Yeah, like a orangey corally pink.
Okay. And again, as you said before, I mean, it doesn't have to be exact. You can bring your own style to it.
Absolutely.
What kind of color appeals to you and or what color you end up with is totally okay. Okay.
Often in my mind, a color scheme works so well and I don't bother test it on my sheet. And then by the time I'm done, it's just every color that you could imagine because I was trying to fix it. That happens too. It's okay.
Well, anyone who's like painted a wall white and gone to the paint store and looked at every shade of white realizes, here we have a question. What if you used darker to start? Accidentally, of course. So
yeah. So the thing with watercolor, even if you have white, because it's transparent, it's not really going to cover that area. So the best thing to do would be to, if that area is still wet, you want to get your paper towel wet with some clean water, and then you're going to use this area to dab the color up. So I actually have, let me get another version of the painting. 1 second. So for instance, let's say with this petal, I had painted this darker than I wanted. I'm going to take my paper towel and I'm going to, try to get it kind of in a precise way that I can just kind of pull the color. And you can see how it pulls it right up. If your paint is already dry, you might need to just get a clean brush that has clean water on it and just kind of go over that area with your brush a little bit. So I'll show you here. That starts to activate the watercolor, and then you can just go back in with your paper towel and you can really just lift that color. It's pretty amazing how much paint you can get to lift off. Just be careful that you're not getting it too wet or rubbing it too much, because then the paper will actually start to disintegrate and it can create a graininess in your painting.
Right.
So that's one way. I find typically I just try to get it to it before it gets too dry, and then I use the paper towel or a brush to kind of, if you need to get along a more detailed edge.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So we're going to take this new color that we've mixed and we are going to paint all of the petals of this flower here. Let's see, mine's gone a little bit dark, so I'm going to lighten mine up as well. You're going to paint all the...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, all the petals on this flower we're going to be painting in this color, and then we're going to again layer over top of that.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I guess initially you almost want that part or to really be like an opaque, so you can layer over top of it as we go. There'll be like a few, maybe two, 3 shades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's 3 different shades of this color that we're going to be working with. Each one will have a little bit more of the red added back to it.
Right. And when you're putting your first layer in, are you often just like you're just coloring it in as you would with any sort of, almost like if you were coloring it in with a marker, or are you trying to make some gradation right from the very beginning?
So typically, it really depends on the effect. If you're doing more of a wet on wet, then typically you're going to be placing the paint in more strategic places to get the gradient and blending of the 2 different shades. Because we're doing this wet on dry technique, not necessarily. So I like to work from the flat kind of color and then build up from that. I just find it easier for beginners. The wet on wet technique can get, I guess colors can muddy together really quickly, and then people can get more disappointed with the outcome, I guess.
Right. And I have another question. There's a petal on top here that has a line in it. Is that a leaf or a petal?
That is a leaf.
Okay.
So the ones with the line are leaves.
So how many petals do I have?
So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 petals.
Okay.
And 3 leaves from that flower.
Okay, got it. Phew, that was close.
And I guess if you had painted it pink, that's okay too, because then you'll just have an extra petal on your flower.
There you go.
That's right.
And again, with these petals, you're going to want to avoid them touching each other while they're wet.
Right.
So leaving a little bit of that white space.
I have not really done that. So thank you for the reminder. I feel whenever we don't have too many questions, it means that people are working. So I assume everybody at home is doing exactly what we are doing, and they're painting in their petals.
Paint in that puddle.
So as we kind of finish filling these in, we're going to get ready to darken this color again. And I love to go over my paintings at the very end and just kind of like touch up any edges that I don't like, things like that. So I typically tend to just cover an area and then I work as I go. I go back and clean it up, just not just for time's sake, but also just to keep the paint drying at a good pace and keep moving throughout the painting so that areas are drying when you want to move on.
Right.
So we're going to add some of the red back into that lighter wash to darken that up. And while it's still, moist, we're going to add some shading to 1/2 of the, I guess, the largest petal on this flower. That's how I'm going to describe it.
Okay. So when you just drew that like right up, sort of like as though you were drawing a leaf right through the middle.
Yeah.
And you're just filling in.
And I'm actually going to soften the contrast a bit by adding more water and kind of blending it. So you're kind of pulling that and then just blending it out so that it's not such a harsh line.
Okay. And you said you added more water to your brush for that?
Yes. So I painted in this half of the petal. Then I went over with some clean water and just used it to do that blending technique. And then at the very end, we'll go and just do a nice crisper line to show that. I'll show you the finished one so you can see what I'm talking about. So you kind of have that shaded area there. And we're going to do it as well with this petal, but not as pigmented.
Right. Okay. The watercolor is a little bit more malleable than I expected, actually.
Yeah, it's not as scary as you thought, right?
That's right. Well, this year is all about confronting your fears, so amongst other things.
Well, and I think part of the fear, I know for me, was just that I hadn't really used watercolor a lot. I really got interested in it about 3 or 4 years ago. But before that, I hadn't really dabbled in it at all, and it did scare me because, as an artist, I guess when you find those new mediums that you're not necessarily as familiar with, my thought was, I don't know how to use this, and I'm not going to like what I create with it. But like I said, the more I've used it, the more happy I've become also with the products that I've created.
And I guess you learn sort of as you go how
to play with it. Like watercolor is kind of unpredictable, but
Right.
yeah, as you play with it more, you start to be like, okay, well, if I add this much water, this is what's going to happen, or if I don't add enough, this is what's going to happen, and then you sort of move from there, right?
Absolutely. So, and then this petal here, which is kind of behind this larger one, we're going to actually darken that one up as well.
Okay.
You can just darken up the whole petal.
So I'm out of paint again, so now I'm mixing some more up. I can see where the mixing, having the tube paints might be handy.
Yeah, so like with mixing with the pans, because you have to keep your palette really wet.
Yeah.
So that's why I like to use this little dropper thing when I'm using a pan, and then I just fill it with water and I just keep dropping water onto my pans to keep them wet, because the more wet they are, the more paint and pigment you're going to be able to grab up.
Right. Okay, that's a good trick. So just darkening that whole petal that's behind there. Okay.
And then we're going to add a little bit of the darker tone underneath here as a shadow and just kind of blend that out as well.
I'm not really sure about my shading here, but.
And so with the shading, I'm just putting kind of a little bit of that paint there. I'm going back, I'm drying my brush off, I'm getting some clean water, and then I'm just really kind of just pulling it.
Right. Yeah, I'm finding that I'm getting like a little ridge of color. So how?
So that might mean that you're using a little bit too much water. And so you can use that technique where you're going to dry your brush off, and then in that area where you're finding the line, just try to smooth it out with your brush. And it should pick up some of the paint and the water there. So we're going to do the middle areas of both of these two flowers. And that is a little bit of red, and we're mixing it with the burnt umber. Not a lot. Darker colors are generally dominating colors, so you want to add them to a lighter color, and you want to add them a little bit at a time. So I have some of my burnt umber there, and you're really just trying to get a darker kind of burgundy red color.
Here's a note from Pony Sheehan. She says, "You make it look so easy," and you definitely do.
Oh. Well, thanks. It's not easy. I practiced this painting a few times, so I've had a lot more practice than all of you.
Takes a lot of work to make something look easy, I've found.
That's the key. Yeah. Well. So we're going to use this kind of burgundy color, and we're going to pull it and just fill in that middle area of the flower. I'm lost for my flower anatomy knowledge right now, so I'm just calling it the middle part.
Center.
Stamina? Is that what it's called? Stamina?
Stamen?
I feel like it's not.
Does anyone know? It'd be great to know.
Yeah. If you answer the questions, that would be amazing.
Flower people who are there, if anyone wants to tell us.
Has to be a botanist out there, something.
So just filling in that dark, and I'm not, although there's sort of like a little bit of a spikiness to that part of the design.
Yeah, so you could kind of keep that. I find with the watercolor, it just kind of goes into itself. But if your petal is dry, then you can kind of add those details in with your brush.
Right. Okay.
And then we're doing the same thing with this area, and you're gonna kind of go over this petal a little bit just to make sure that that middle part of the flower is round and has the appearance. It just gives it that depth again.
Right. Okay. Bernice is asking what size of brush you're using right now. I clutched onto my 6 and I've just been doing everything with. But
So using a 2.
This is actually a 5, but it is because it's from this travel set. It looks smaller.
It's like the size of a 2.
It's just a short brush. I think this is the same. This is a 2.
And Wendy Edmonds says stamen.
Stamen.
That's what the center is?
Stamina.
I'm like, isn't that a job?
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So in this, oh, I see. So we're sort of going into that darker area?
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
And just kind of rounding out that top. And not to worry, because we're going to go down here and kind of just clean up this whole area once we go back to that flower after. So for the...
Sorry?
Oh, that's okay. If you had a question, I was just going to move on to the next flower in our bunch.
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Yeah. So again, we're going to use this exact same color that we used for this color here. And then when it dries, we're going to go over it with a more orangey yellow tone, which is going to give this kind of two-tone effect there.
Okay.
So again, trying to keep your petals separate, and you want a light wash for this one because we're going to be going over each petal. And I find with this one, I was just kind of not worrying too much about the color because we're going to be going over it again. So I was using the same water and kind of color and waiting until it would fade out and then adding more paint to my brush. So some of the petals are going to look a little lighter than the others, and that's okay.
So like just using some of this leftover pink that I have, washing it really lightly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's this one that looks like a daisy kind of.
Yes. Yeah.
And as you said, just very, very light. So even if you're kind of, it's watery, that's okay?
Yeah.
Right.
And you just want to, so the thing is, if it's watery, so you're going to pull kind of any water down toward the inner of the petal because that's where you would see the shadow on that type of flower. But you don't want it to be too much water. So if it's pooling too much, you want to lift some of that up.
Okay. Got it.
And because you just painted the center, I would be particularly careful when you get to this area and maybe leave a bit of a bigger gap because you don't want that color bleeding in with these petals for sure.
Okay.
And if that happens, that's okay. I would just use your paper towel, dab it off, and just try to start again rather than kind of fixing the color because once it bleeds in, it's kind of hard. You have to let that area dry before you try and go and fix it.
Right.
And like, feel free to play with color. You don't necessarily. I know we have a lot of sort of pinks, reds, burnt oranges. Feel free if you want your petals to be purple, green, gray, whatever you're into. Definitely feel free to sort of to play with it. You don't have to follow the painting verbatim.
And you're just going to use the same technique. So if you were, for instance, you made a violet color, you would just start with that base kind of pigmented dark color and just wash that out, adding white to lighten it up, and kind of then re-adding as you layer back on your shading areas.
Right.
So I actually have an example of pooling here. So my petal, it's kind of all pooling up at the top, and I know that that's going to dry looking like a blotch. So I'm just taking my brush and I'm just kind of pulling some of that color back up. So it kind of just evened it out.
Okay.
Watercolor brushes are meant to really hold and absorb the water. So that's how they can pull up the brush, the paint so nicely. They just kind of suck it all up.
Right.
So we're going to let those petals dry, and we're going to move on to some of the leaves while we let those finish drying, and then we're going to come back to them again.
Okay.
And I love green. So this is one of my favorite parts of this painting, is doing the foliage. So I already have some of my paint left over from before. So I'm going to just kind of go through mixing it, but that's kind of what it's going to look like when you're done mixing it. So it's yellow and blue to make a green tone, but you want it to be mostly yellow and very little blue. And then I added a little touch of white. And it just has a really nice warm tone green that it brings out. So I will mix some more for everyone to see. I'm just going to add some more yellow.
So yellow and blue. Back to our color theory.
Yes, yellow and a very little bit of blue, because again, blue is going to be your dominant color. I just added that little bit of blue, and it's more of a yellow green. And you're going to want to wash that out pretty nice for the first area that we're going to paint. It almost looks neon when you mix it, which I think is what I like about it. So we're going to actually do the outside edge of the painting. If you did a freehand sketch and you wanted to use like a bowl or anything else round to make a circle, that's fine. It doesn't have to be the same size and shape, or you could just freehand a circle. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle either, but I always typically am finding round things in my home and using those to make circles. So this is kind of one of my areas where it gets a little awkward for me, so I tend to move my page, but I'm just basically using my brush to follow that outline, and I'm just going to try and do it all in one sweep. You feel free to stop partway and then kind of readjust your hand if you're not comfortable kind of pulling it all the way across, but I find it gets a nice technique if you're able to just pull it across. It has a cleaner line that way.
And are you using your thinnest brush now for this?
Yes. So
Okay.
I'm actually using my 5 still, but this would be a good time when I would suggest going to your 2, like a smaller one.
Okay. And
If you're more comfortable, and I can even switch to it too, just to kind of show.
Can you show me your color again?
Pardon?
Can you show me your color again?
Oh. So that's the one I just mixed. So
Okay.
it's mostly yellow,
Right. Quite yellowy.
blue, and you're gonna get a really yellow green.
Okay. And we have a question from Simi from Montreal. Hi, Simi. She's
Hi,
asking, can you please give us some basic tips about shading?
Sure. So I think the best way to learn about shading is to study objects under light and to kind of practice with your sketching in that sense. And that doesn't necessarily mean sketching with pencil, but even using your watercolor set to sketch. So when you're looking at an object and you're seeing light hit it from different angles, you're going to see shadows in different places. So for me, I typically, when I'm working on one of my professional pieces, I'm using references. So usually I've done sketches of, my subject matter, or I've taken photographs, things like that, that I then work from. But as far as learning about shadows and things like that, that's the best way. Just start setting up different objects. Still life is a great way to learn about shadows and composition as well, because you can work with making different arrangements and seeing how that translates into a painting or a drawing.
Even looking, if you go into a mirror and look at your face, you can see sort of where the light hits and where the shadows hit, sort of the same idea.
That's a good internal pastime during boring Zoom meetings. You can just examine the shading in people's houses and your own face.
That's so true.
Don't tell your boss I recommended that.
So we're just pulling. And most watercolor brushes are designed that they have a relief. They come to a fine tip. So I could use a thicker brush like this and I could still get that fine tip, because if you see, the brush comes to a point. So that's the great thing, is that you don't typically need to use a bunch of different size brushes. I would always opt, if you're only having one, to do something more in the middle. So like a 5 or a 6, the one that I've been using.
It's great how affordable this is. I know the paper is quite expensive, but this kit I got was it's like $10 or something, and I'm glad to get these brushes. And
the great thing about watercolor is, even, a dollar store palette, you're obviously not going to get the same. You're not going to get the exact same effect as far as blending colors, things like that. But honestly, you can really work with them. You can make some things work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I always recommend, for a beginner with watercolor, like, you're going to want these colors that we're using in the class today are your basic set that you could really mix any color from. And then that's kind of where I would start. And then you can kind of add colors to your own palette as you kind of start to understand what color schemes you like to work with personally. A raw sienna, which is a lighter version of the brown, is a good addition. And a couple other shades of green or blue are great as well. So, but definitely just these kind of 5 basic colors is all you really need to mix any color in the color rainbow. It's pretty awesome. Awesome stuff. Okay, so we're gonna keep moving on with the green, and we're going to use it to do our stem here on this kind of branch of leaves that's coming out. And we're also going to use it for this bottom one down here. So there's 2 stems on the bottom. We're using the lighter green for this one. And we're gonna freehand the leaves. So hopefully that's not scary for anyone. It's just kind of a simple technique. I'm going to show you 2 different ways that you could do leaves. And one of them is a little more easy for beginners, and then another one is for people that maybe have a little more experience with watercolor. So we're going to kind of start at the top here. So this is the more beginner level technique. You're going to just kind of do a leaf outline, fill it in, and then you're just pulling it into the stem. And I know my paint's pretty light, so I'm just gonna hold that up so you can kind of see it.
Okay, so like a little leaf. Can you show us the finished piece again so we can see what what leaves we're aspiring to?
So this is the leaves we're working on here, the leaves.
Right. So,
and there's actually a pink tone going over top of those after. So that's why they have that double tone to them. So they're not going to look like that right away when you put them down.
Okay.
And you're just going to kind of do that. I'm going to darken my green a bit just to show you another technique you could use, which is where you just kind of, you use the tip of your brush and then you kind of like apply more pressure, and then you get to a finer point again, and that can give you a brush shape as well. When you get good at that, you can kind of do that fast, and it's a nice way to do a lot of leaves in a short period of time. So I'm just going to keep with this technique here. And you don't want the leaves to touch the stem, like along the side. You want to have a little bit of space, and then you kind of create a stem to connect it. That will just prevent it from bleeding.
So I noticed that we have used up a lot more time than I expected. And while I would like to be here all night, probably we're not supposed to do that. So I'm wondering, with things like the leaves, maybe we could leave them and people can come back to them after.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, just
If you wanted, maybe should go over just the stems and then the just shading the other green.
So, well, I'll show you how I shade the leaves first. So
Sure.
You're just going to actually take a little bit of your really kind of washed out pink. And while your leaves are still a little bit wet, you're just going to kind of add a little bit of that color and pull it into your green. Even the way I did it is a little bit too dark, so I would recommend a lighter. Just kind of a lighter wash.
I can't believe how fast it's gone. I just have completely lost track of time,
I know.
which I feel is the sign of a good pastime.
I hope so.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you're taking the pink and you're just kind of,
Yeah, I'm adding in, not even to all of the leaves, but just some of them. I'm kind of layering it with that color, which is going to give you that nice tone that you see in the original one here. It just warms up the leaves and it ties them into the flowers.
yeah, it's beautiful.
For the darker green, you're going to be making the same green. You're just going to be making a green with more blue in it. What is the time?
It's 6:22, if you can believe it.
Oh,
well,
wow.
it's, sorry, 8:22 where you are, 6:22 in Edmonton.
So I'll just kind of go through some of the last steps, and I can show them with the original as well, just to kind of explain. But you're going to want to make a bit of a darker green there, and you're going to add some of your burnt umber to that. So you get that nice kind of earthy green. And you're going to use that to do the same leaf technique that you did for the lighter green. And then when you get to the leaves, you're going to want to add more water and dilute that back out, and just using the same technique, and then kind of connect your leaves. With these ones, what I did is I kind of pulled a little bit of the paint toward the tip of the leaf because I liked the texture and kind of effect that it created. It had them a little bit darker at the ends.
And here you're going for more of a darker browny green leaf than we had before, yeah. And I hope we're all going to be like dropping burnt umber casually into conversation.
Yeah. I'm so used to calling it that, but yeah, brown is much more straightforward. So, so that's how you're going to finish up these leaves as well. And so you're going to do that with this area here and this area here. I also used this green to fill in these petals. So I could demonstrate that really quick on one petal. That we're using that kind of flat technique of filling it in, and then we're adding a darker tone to one half of the leaf to create that shading look.
Right, so similar to how we did to that one petal.
And then for this last area, which is the berries, and I think they're such a nice addition, so I would hate not to show how to do those. So you're going to be working with your red. and your burnt umber. So you're going to be working with that burgundy color again, but you want it to be substantially darker. So a lot more burnt umber in there.
So darker even from the what we had used for the center of the flowers.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
More brown, definitely.
Okay.
A very similar tone, but just a little bit more of the brown. And you're just gonna follow your outline. And then once you have your outline, you're actually just going to wet your brush, wash out a little bit of that color, and create these little berries on the ends. And what I've actually done is just let the water pool in those, because as they dry, it has a really nice effect. And you could make some of them lighter if you want by pulling some of the color back up and kind of creating little highlighted areas on your berries like that. And the key with this one is just make sure that the berries aren't touching and that this part of your stem is dry before you overlap a berry on them, because it will bleed into it.
Right. When you're done with that, can you hold it up and just show a close-up of that as I try to clean off what I just spilled on my page?
Oh, for sure, yeah. So, and then this is with the finished piece. So as you can see, like even here, some of the berries, I pulled some of the color back up just to make them a little lighter, just to give a variance. It just creates more interest in the painting.
Right.
And then I'll show just really quickly how we did some of the detail on the leaves. Same kind of blending techniques, like you're looking at the shadows. So here for these petals, and I just use this same light green for these ones. Just creating some shadow where the leaves would overlap each other. And then again here, just kind of creating those creases and shadowed areas in the leaves, especially down here would be a great place where the leaf is kind of behind the flower.
Right. As you said, just sort of thinking about and observing even how things are in nature and where a shadow might be and where a highlight might be.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then just to, for everyone to be able to finish off these white areas that we left in our several of our flowers, we're just going to be going back and taking the same color that we were using and just kind of working in those creases and filling them in. Which just helps kind of clean up the painting overall.
And you're doing that with the darker color or lighter color or the same color?
Just kind of the same lighter color that will fill it, so that you're not just seeing those white gaps, but that you're not really creating too much of an outline.
Right. Okay. So, and what about if you have a situation like I have, where maybe some of the colors you've kind of run out of them, or you don't really have the pink that you mixed, there's not much left? What would you do about that?
Yeah, so that, again, because watercolor can be kind of pulled and washed through so much, you know, if you don't have that particular pink or red, you could work with another shade of pink or red. You could also work with, you know, an orange tone and just relayer. That's actually happened to me before, well, today. we ran out of the original yellow we were using. So we've just been using a lighter shade of yellow, and it really is working quite the same. You'll see with the leaves, there's a bit of a difference in the tone that we're getting, but it's just kind of play it by ear. And if you can be flexible, things like florals and leaves, you could really use so many different shades. And you could also just have fun and make some blue leaves or orange leaves and give it, you know, kind of an interesting, unique look to your painting. Mm-hmm. And just to quickly wrap up, there was one detail. Oh, with the daisy kind of flower,
We were going to just go back over, take the yellow and make a really kind of light orange. And then you would just go over all of those petals as well with that orangey color.
So a little tiny bit of the leftover red and yellow.
Okay. So you mix that separately. You're mixing up adding yellow to make an orange.
Yeah, you're going to pull a tiny bit of the red and a little bit of the yellow with a little bit of water. And then dilute it, and then that'll give you sort of an orangey, almost an orangey pink, really. Mm-hmm. And then you can add little bits more red as you go, and just kind of, you're going to get back to that more vibrant pinky red, and then that is also going to be used on some of those.
Right. And are you putting that over the whole petal?
Also fill in the center area here. So as you can see, that's like the really vibrant peachy red that we started with this flower.
Right.
But just as a reminder, it's red with a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white.
Right. Okay. I honestly hate to cut this off, and I kind of think, I mean, none of us can go anywhere anyway, so we stay here all night. But I know that some of our technical people have multiple children at home that they have to get to, and probably our viewers may have, I don't know, laundry to do or other things to do as well. But I will post the finished picture as soon as possible on the Facebook page, and we'll put it up on the website. So if you're working at home and you just want to see, again, how they've done everything, that'll be there for you to watch. And hopefully we answered all your questions. As I said, very few questions usually means that everyone's hands are busy. So that's great. It is such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much.
It has been so fantastic. Thank you both for coming, for sharing your knowledge. A reminder to everybody, they do all kinds of classes, artistsonline.ca. They're easy to find. You can also find them, the stories on the Globe and the Facebook page. We have links, so please check them out. Thank you to our technical people, Patrick and Deb, who literally saved us from a digital forest somehow earlier. That was a new one. Thank you to all of you for joining us. A reminder to sign up for our newsletter, and that these videos are available to watch anytime. You can find them on our Facebook page, through the Globe and Mail. They're on YouTube. They will stay up indefinitely. So if it seemed like we were going fast and you missed some things and you spilled a cup of coffee on your page, no problem. Go back, start at the beginning. Don't forget to stay in touch. Show us your work. I really want to see what everyone did tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all on May 11th when we're going to make miniatures with Tom Brown. Until then, stay safe and stay creative and have fun painting with watercolor.
Thank you so much.